She thought she could slip through the shadows and disappear before anyone noticed. But fate had other plans, and those plans came in the form of the wealthiest, most unattainable duke in England, whose arms caught her just as surely as his eyes would soon see through every secret she'd tried to hide. Welcome, my beloved. Before we dive into the whole story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as beautiful as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. The candles burning in their gilded sconces cast dancing shadows across the ballroom, making everything shimmer like a dream or a nightmare, depending on who you were. For Rosalind Fairwater, it was decidedly the latter. She pressed herself against the silk-papered wall, wishing she could simply melt into the damask pattern and vanish. Around her, society's finest swirled in a kaleidoscope of jewels and satin, their laughter tinkling like champagne glasses, their movements choreographed by years of breeding and expectation. She didn't belong here. More accurately, she no longer belonged here. 3 months ago, everything had been different. 3 months ago, her father hadn't lost everything at the gaming tables. 3 months ago, her name hadn't become synonymous with scandal and ruin. "Is that the Fairwater girl?" The whisper sliced through the music like a blade. Rosalind didn't need to turn to know who spoke Lady Ashcroft, whose talent for cruelty was matched only by her talent for orchestrating social destruction. "I heard they're completely destitute, living in some dreadful boarding house in the merchant quarter. How did she even get an invitation?" Rosalind's gloved hands clenched at her sides. The invitation had been a trap, of course. Her cousin Henrietta had sent it, dripping with false sympathy and promises of reconciliation. "Come to the Bellingham ball," the note had read. What a fool she'd been to believe it. Now she understood. Henrietta wanted her here precisely so society could see her humiliation, her reduced circumstances, her desperate attempt to cling to a world that had already cast her out. Entertainment for the privileged. A cautionary tale wrapped in borrowed silk. The gown Rosalind wore had once belonged to her mother. She'd altered it herself by candlelight, her fingers aching as she unpicked and resewed the outdated sleeves, lowered the neckline to match current fashion. In the dim light of her rented room, it had looked almost presentable. Here, surrounded by the season's latest creations from London's finest modesties, it screamed of poverty and pretension. Across the ballroom, she caught sight of Henrietta, holding court near the refreshment table, surrounded by admirers. Her cousin's eyes met hers for just a moment, and the smile that curved her lips was pure poison. Rosalind's breath came shallow and quick. She needed to leave. Now, before the humiliation became complete, before someone, Miss Fairwater. The voice froze her in place. Lord Beauchamp, her father's former friend. Before the scandal. "How unexpected to see you here." His tone made it clear exactly how unwelcome her presence was. She managed a curtsy that felt like breaking glass. "Lord Beauchamp, I was just leaving." "Were you?" His eyebrow rose. Perhaps that would be, but Rosalind didn't wait to hear what would be best. She turned, scanning the ballroom for the nearest exit. The main doors were impossible. Too many people. Too much scrutiny. But there, partially hidden behind a column, was a servant's passage she remembered from years ago, when she'd attended this house as an honored guest. The orchestra swelled into a waltz. Couples flooded the floor, and for a blessed moment, attention shifted away from her. This was her chance. Rosalind moved quickly but carefully along the perimeter of the room, keeping to the shadows, using the dancing crowd as cover. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Almost there. Just a few more steps. Freedom beckoned through that hidden doorway like salvation itself. She didn't see the figure that stepped into her path until it was too late. The collision happened in an instant. One moment, Rosalind was rushing toward escape. The next, she'd crashed into something solid and unyielding. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall, and she found herself staring up into a face that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. Alexander Hadley, Duke of Winterbourne, the wealthiest man in England, the most sought-after bachelor in 3 kingdoms, and according to every gossip column and society mama, utterly unreachable, a man who attended balls out of duty but never danced, who deflected marriage proposals with the skill of a seasoned diplomat, who seemed to observe society from behind an invisible wall of polished indifference. His eyes were storm blue, sharp and assessing. They took in everything about her in a single sweep: the altered gown, the too tight grip of her gloved hands on her reticule, the barely controlled panic in her expression. She felt exposed, as if he could see straight through to every desperate secret she carried. "Forgive me, Your Grace." The words tumbled out too quickly. "I wasn't watching where..." Clearly. His voice was deep, cultured, with an edge of something she couldn't quite identify. Not quite amusement. Not quite curiosity. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm perfectly well, thank you." She tried to step back, but his hands remained on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Running from something?" The question was quiet, meant only for her ears. "Or someone." Rosalind's pulse jumped. How could he possibly know? "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" His gaze flicked over her shoulder, toward where Henrietta stood watching with barely concealed satisfaction, surrounded by her circle of devoted sycophants. When his eyes returned to Rosalind's face, something had shifted in their depths. "The Fairwater family. Your father lost his fortune last season." It wasn't a question. Heat flooded her cheeks, humiliation mixed with anger. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. The Fairwater scandal had been delicious fodder for the gossip mills, for months. "Then you understand why I should leave." She finally managed to pull free of his grasp, her voice low and fierce. "I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." "Was it?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Or was it perhaps a calculated cruelty on someone else's part?" The accuracy of his assessment stunned her into silence. He saw too much. This Duke. Far too much. Behind them, the music swelled. Laughter echoed off the decorated walls. The entire glittering assembly continued its elaborate dance of social maneuvering and careful performance, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in the shadows near the servants' entrance. "Your Grace, I really must," Rosalind began again, but he cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "You've dropped something." She looked down. Her reticule had fallen during their collision, spilling its meager contents across the marble floor. A handkerchief. A few coins, barely enough for a week's bread. And a letter, its seal broken. The paper worn from repeated reading. Alexander bent and retrieved the letter before she could stop him. His eyes scanned the words. She saw the exact moment comprehension dawned. The letter was from a solicitor, cold and impersonal, informing her that her father's debts had been called in. That their house, their belongings, everything they'd once owned, would be auctioned. That she had exactly 1 week to find alternative accommodation or face debtor's prison alongside her ailing father. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. The cool assessment had been replaced by something warmer, something almost like recognition. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly. "That's none of your concern." She reached for the letter, but he held it just out of reach. "A week, according to this. Perhaps less, if your creditors are feeling particularly vindictive." His jaw tightened. "And you came here tonight, why? Hoping for mercy? For old friends to remember past kindnesses?" The accuracy stung. "I came because I was a fool." "No." He folded the letter carefully and held it out to her. "You came because desperation makes us all do things we know better than to do. You came because hope is a stubborn, treacherous thing that refuses to die even when reason demands it should. Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. For just a moment, the mask of ducal perfection slipped, and she glimpsed something underneath, something raw and lonely and achingly familiar. "Rosalind," Henrietta's voice cut through the music like a knife. "Rosalind Fairwater, is that really you skulking in the corners?" The moment shattered. Every head in the vicinity turned. The whispers began immediately, spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. Alexander's hand closed around her elbow. "What? No. I don't even—" "Good answer. But trust me anyway." His grip tightened fractionally. "Because your cousin is heading this way with half the ballroom in tow, and unless I'm very much mistaken, she intends to complete your humiliation in the most public way possible. So, I'll ask again. Do you trust me?" Rosalind looked into those blue eyes and saw something unexpected, not pity, but understanding. The understanding of someone who knew what it meant to be trapped, to perform for an audience, to smile while drowning. Behind her, Henrietta's footsteps clicked closer across the marble. The whispers grew louder. The trap was closing. She made her choice. Yes. Alexander's response was immediate. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Rosalind and the advancing crowd, his body language shifting into something both protective and possessive. When he spoke, his voice carried across the ballroom with the natural authority of someone born to command. "Ah, there you are, Miss Fairwater. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten our arrangement." The whispers stopped. Absolute silence descended, broken only by the confused squeak of a violin as the musicians faltered mid-measure. Rosalind stared at him, utterly bewildered. Henrietta recovered first, her expression cycling rapidly through shock, suspicion, and barely veiled fury. "Your Grace, I'm afraid there must be some misunderstanding. My cousin has no arrangement with—" "Forgive me, Lady Henrietta, but I wasn't addressing you." Alexander's tone was polite ice. He turned to Rosalind, and something flickered in his eyes, a message, a plea for her to follow his lead. "You did receive my note, didn't you? Requesting the honor of the supper dance." Every eye in the ballroom fixed on Rosalind, her mind raced. This was madness. The Duke of Winterbourne didn't dance, everyone knew that. He certainly didn't request dances from disgraced, impoverished nobodies. If she went along with this lie, she would be setting herself up for an even more spectacular fall when the truth emerged. But what choice did she have? Henrietta stood 3 paces away, practically vibrating with the desire to publicly eviscerate her. Lord Beauchamp and his set had gathered nearby, waiting for the entertainment to begin. The entire assembly watched, hungry for scandal. And Alexander, this impossibly wealthy, impossibly remote duke, was offering her a lifeline. Why, she couldn't fathom. But the alternative was immediate. Devastating humiliation. She swallowed hard and managed a curtsy. "Of course, Your Grace. I apologize for the confusion. I was merely catching my breath before our dance." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but Alexander's answering smile was warm enough to almost feel real. "Excellent." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Rosalind hesitated for only a heartbeat before placing her hand on his sleeve. The muscle beneath the expensive fabric was solid, steady, real. This was happening. She was actually doing this. They walked together toward the center of the ballroom, and the crowd parted before them like the Red Sea. Rosalind kept her chin up, her expression neutral, even as her heart threatened to beat straight out of her chest. Beside her, Alexander moved with easy confidence, as if escorting ruined women to dance floors was something he did every Tuesday. Henrietta's voice followed them, shrill with disbelief. "Apparently everyone knows very little." Alexander didn't even glance back. How unfortunate for everyone. A shocked titter ran through the assembly. Someone, it sounded like, Lady Ashcroft gasped audibly. The orchestra, sensing drama, launched into a waltz with renewed enthusiasm. And then Alexander's hand was at her waist, his other hand capturing hers, and they were moving together across the polished floor. Rosalind had danced 1,000 waltzes in her former life, had glided through countless ballrooms on the arms of suitable gentlemen. But this was different. This felt like flying and falling simultaneously. "Breathe," Alexander murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "You look like you're facing a firing squad." "I might as well be." Her words came out strangled. "What are you doing? Why are you helping me? Would you prefer I hadn't?" "No." "Yes." "I don't know." She struggled to focus on the steps, on maintaining the proper distance, on not tripping over her own feet. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His hand tightened fractionally at her waist, guiding her through a turn. "I know what it's like to be trapped in a role you never asked for. To have every eye upon you, judging, measuring, finding you wanting." She looked up at him, startled by the raw honesty in his voice. His expression remained neutral, perfect for public consumption, but his eyes told a different story. In them, she saw loneliness, recognition, understanding. "The Duke of Winterbourne? Trapped?" She almost laughed. "You're the most powerful man in England. Power and freedom are not the same thing, Miss Fairwater. Surely recent experience has taught you that much." The barb struck home, but not cruelly. He was right, of course. She'd once had everything society deemed valuable: wealth, position, connections, and she'd still been a prisoner of expectation and propriety. Her father had controlled her life absolutely, arranging suitable matches, dictating proper behavior, spending her dowry on his gambling debts while she smiled and pretended everything was perfect. At least now, in her poverty, she was honest. Miserable, desperate, and terrified, but honest. "What happens after this dance?" she asked quietly. "When everyone realizes this was a fiction, when they discover you took pity on some pathetic—" "Stop." The word was sharp enough to make her stumble. Alexander steadied her immediately, his grip firm. "Whatever else happens tonight, you are not pathetic. You are a woman trying to survive impossible circumstances with what dignity remains to you. There is nothing pathetic in that." Something inside Rosalind's chest cracked at his words. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will for 3 months, through her father's breakdown, through the auction of their home, through the jeers and whispers and casual cruelties of people she'd once called friends. She'd accepted it all, absorbed every blow, told herself she deserved nothing better. But this stranger, this duke who had no reason to care, looked at her and saw worth. The waltz carried them past Henrietta, whose face had gone the color of curdled milk, past Lord Beauchamp, who looked genuinely confused, past clusters of guests who whispered behind fans and gloved hands, trying to make sense of this impossible turn of events. "They're going to talk," Rosalind said. "About this. About us. The speculation will be merciless. God Han. About this. Let them talk." Alexander's mouth quirked in something almost resembling a smile. "I've been the subject of speculation my entire life. At least this particular rumor will be interesting. You'll regret this. Helping me. I mean, when you, Miss Fairwater." He spun her through another turn, and for just a moment, she forgot to be afraid. "Has it occurred to you that perhaps I'm not the one being helped here?" The waltz ended far too quickly. One moment Rosalind was suspended in that strange, dreamlike state where only the music and Alexander's steady presence existed. The next, the final notes faded, and reality came crashing back with the force of an avalanche. The ballroom erupted in applause, polite, confused, speculative. Every eye remained fixed on them. Alexander released her waist, but kept hold of her hand, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles, in a gesture that might have been reassurance or warning. "Now what?" Rosalind whispered, panic rising in her throat. The dance had bought her temporary reprieve. But what came next? She couldn't simply walk out of the ballroom on the arm of a duke and expect the world to forget she was ruined. "Now," Alexander said calmly, "we take some air. The gardens, I think." He tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow and began steering her toward the terrace doors. "And we give everyone something to truly speculate about. Your Grace." "I don't think." "Good. Don't think. Simply walk, and try to look as though you're enjoying my company." That pulled a startled, slightly hysterical laugh from her. "Quite possibly." He guided her past Lady Ashcroft, who looked as though she'd swallowed a lemon. "But we've committed to this performance now. Might as well play it through to the end." The cool evening air hit Rosalind's flushed cheeks like a blessing as they stepped onto the torchlit terrace. Behind them, the ballroom buzzed with barely suppressed excitement. She could practically hear the gossip already forming. The Duke of Winterbourne, dancing with the disgraced Fairwater girl, walking with her into the gardens unchaperoned. What could it possibly mean? Alexander led her down marble steps into the formal gardens, where precisely trimmed hedges created shadowed corridors away from prying eyes. The torchlight didn't reach here. Only moonlight illuminated the gravel paths and the fountain burbling somewhere in the darkness. When they were sufficiently hidden from view, Alexander finally released her arm. Rosalind immediately wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the mild night air. "Thank you," she managed, "for what you did in there. I don't understand why. But don't thank me yet." Alexander turned to face her, and in the moonlight, his expression was unreadable. "We need to talk about what happens next." "Oh, we need to talk. Nothing happens next." Rosalind forced herself to meet his eyes. "You were kind enough to save me from humiliation tonight. Tomorrow, you'll go back to your life, and I'll go back to mine. Whatever mine is now." "And what is your life now, Miss Fairwater?" His voice was quiet, but relentless. "According to that letter, you have 1 week before your creditors seize what little you have left. Where will you go? What will you do?" The questions hurt because they were the same ones that kept her awake every night. "I'll find something. A position as a governess, perhaps. Or, Crom. A governess." Alexander's laugh was hollow. "A woman of quality, educated in music and watercolors and French, competing with hundreds of other displaced gentlewomen for positions that pay barely enough to survive. And that's if anyone will hire you at all, given your family's scandal." Each word landed like a blow. Rosalind's fingernails dug into her palms. "What would you have me do? I have no other options. My father is ill. We have no family willing to help. No friends left. Who?" Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, fighting for control. "I'm doing the best I can." "I know." Something in Alexander's tone softened. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his jaw was clenched tight. "Which is why I'm going to make you an offer. And before you refuse, I want you to truly consider it." Dread pooled in Rosalind's stomach. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that will solve both our problems." He held up a hand before she could speak. "You need money, security, and a way to restore your family's name. I need." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Freedom from expectation. From the constant parade of ambitious mamas throwing their daughters at my title. From society's demands that I marry for duty and produce an heir according to their timeline." Rosalind's heart began to pound. "Your Grace, if you're suggesting—" "I'm suggesting a marriage of convenience." The words hung in the night air between them. Impossible, and somehow inevitable. A business arrangement. If you prefer, you would become my duchess, gain access to my fortune to settle your father's debts. In exchange, you would provide me with the appearance of a conventional marriage, deflecting pressure from society while allowing us both to live largely independent lives. The world tilted. Rosalind gripped the edge of a nearby bench to steady herself. You can't be serious. We met 30 minutes ago. You don't know anything about me. In Lyme. I know you're desperate. I know you're proud enough to hate accepting help, but practical enough to recognize when you need it. I know you care enough about your father to attend a ball designed to humiliate you, simply because you thought it might help your situation. Alexander's blue eyes held hers. And I know that if I do nothing, you'll disappear into poverty and obscurity, and the world will lose someone who deserves better. People don't marry strangers out of altruism. You're right, they don't. Alexander's smile was bitter. Which is why this wouldn't be altruism. This would be a transaction. I told you before you wouldn't be the only one benefiting. Rosalind studied him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw past the expensive clothes and ducal bearing to the man underneath. A man who, despite his wealth and power, wore loneliness like a second skin. A man who attended balls out of obligation, but never truly participated. A man who, like her, seemed to be performing a role that no longer fit. What aren't you telling me? She asked quietly. Alexander was silent for a long moment. Then he turned away, looking up at the moon. My uncle, the previous duke, died 2 years ago. He left me everything, the title, the estates, the fortune. What he didn't leave me was a choice about what to do with any of it. Society expects me to marry, to produce heirs, to continue the illustrious Hadley line. My cousins circle like vultures, hoping I'll die without issue so they can inherit. Every social event becomes a battlefield of matchmaking and manipulation. He turned back to her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the last 7 years of my life being groomed to be the perfect duke, the perfect peer, the perfect matrimonial catch. I've attended every ball, every dinner party, every tedious social obligation expected of my station, and I've hated every moment of it. His hands clenched at his sides. I want one thing in this life that's mine. One choice I make on my own terms. And if that choice happens to help someone who needs it, then perhaps there's some justice in this world after all. Number 1. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of music from the ballroom and the whisper of wind through the hedges. Rosalind's mind raced. This was insane, impossible. She couldn't marry a stranger, no matter how desperate her circumstances. Could she? I need to think about this. Rosalind's voice came out steadier than she felt. It's too much. I can't simply... Of course. Alexander's expression closed off, returning to that neutral, ducal mask. Take whatever time you need. I'll have my solicitor contact you with the details of what such an arrangement would entail. Financial provisions, living arrangements, expectations on both sides. Your Grace, Alexander. He cut her off gently. If we're to even consider this, I think we can dispense with formality in private. At least. My name is Alexander. She nodded slowly. Alexander, then. And I'm Roslyn. Just Roslyn. Just Roslyn. Something almost like a smile ghosted across his face. Somehow, I doubt that's ever been true. Before she could respond, voices carried from the terrace. Henrietta's shrill tones rose above the others, disappeared together into the gardens. The scandal of it. Someone must. We need to return. Alexander offered his arm again. Unless you'd prefer to give your cousin genuine ammunition for her gossip? Rosalind's stomach twisted, but she took his arm. What do we tell them? Everyone will want to know. We tell them nothing. Alexander covered her hand with his. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. The truth is far less interesting than whatever they'll imagine. They emerged from the gardens to find half the ballroom had spilled onto the terrace, ostensibly taking the air but really hoping to catch a glimpse of the Duke and his mysterious companion. Henrietta stood at the forefront, her face a mask of false concern. Rosalind, thank heavens. I was so worried when you disappeared. Her eyes were pure malice. One can't be too careful these days. A young woman's reputation is so fragile, after all. The threat was clear. Henrietta would spread whatever rumors served her purpose, painting Rosalind as a desperate seductress who'd thrown herself at the Duke. It would be the final nail in the coffin of Rosalind's already ruined reputation. But Alexander's response was smooth as silk. How thoughtful of you, Lady Henrietta. Though I assure you, Miss Fairwater's reputation is perfectly secure. We were merely discussing my late mother's favorite roses. Miss Fairwater has quite the knowledge of horticulture. Several people blinked in confusion. Roses? It was so mundane, so utterly boring, that it actually worked. The gathered crowd deflated slightly, disappointed by the lack of scandal. Henrietta's mouth opened and closed like a fish. In fact, Alexander continued, his voice carrying across the terrace with deliberate clarity, I've invited Miss Fairwater to call upon my sister tomorrow afternoon. They share similar interests, I believe. Lady Genevieve will be delighted to make her acquaintance. The statement landed like a bomb. Alexander's sister, Lady Genevieve Hadley, was one of the most respected women in society. An invitation to her home was a mark of supreme social approval. For the disgraced Rosalind Fairwater to receive such an invitation was unthinkable. Unless, of course, the Duke of Winterbourne had specific reasons for wanting her accepted back into society. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Rosalind felt dizzy. What was he doing? This would only make things worse when the truth came out. When everyone realized, Alexander's hand tightened on hers, a silent message. Trust me. How generous, Henrietta managed, her voice strangled. I'm sure Rosalind is most honored. I am, Rosalind heard herself say. Thank you. Your Grace. Please convey my gratitude to Lady Genevieve. I shall. Alexander's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely impenetrable. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the supper dance is beginning. Miss Fairwater? And just like that, he was leading her back into the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the whispering crowds, back into the golden light and music. The orchestra struck up another waltz, and they moved together across the floor as naturally as breathing. Your sister, Rosalind whispered. Does she actually know? Genevieve will play along. Alexander spun her through a turn. She's been trying to matchmake me for years. She'll be thrilled. But I haven't agreed to anything. I know. The invitation stands regardless of your decision. His blue eyes met hers. This isn't about coercion, Rosalind. It's about giving you options. Real options. Not the desperate scrambling your cousin intended for tonight. Something in Rosalind's chest ached. When was the last time anyone had offered her genuine kindness? When had anyone looked at her situation and seen a person worth helping, rather than a cautionary tale to whisper about? Why are you doing this? The question escaped before she could stop it. Really? Not the marriage arrangement. I understand that's transactional. But this, tonight, helping me when you could have simply walked away. Why? Alexander was quiet for several measures, guiding her through the steps with practiced ease. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. 7 years ago, when my uncle died and I inherited the title, I was drowning. Completely overwhelmed. I made a mistake, trusted the wrong person with my uncertainty. They used it against me, tried to force me into a marriage that would have destroyed me. Rosalind's breath caught. What happened? A friend intervened. Someone who had no obligation to help me, who gained nothing from it, but who saw that I needed saving and did it anyway. His eyes found hers again, and in them, she saw old pain, old gratitude. He died 3 months ago. Heart failure. I never got to repay him for that kindness. So you're paying it forward, Rosalind whispered. To me. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply recognize a fellow prisoner when I see one. Alexander's smile was sad. Either way, the offer stands. Think about it. Decide what's best for you and your father. And know that whatever you choose, you have at least one person in this world who sees your worth. The dance ended. The crowd applauded, and Rosalind found herself blinking back tears in the middle of a ballroom, held steady by a man who was either her salvation or her doom. She honestly couldn't tell which. What she did know was that when Alexander escorted her to his waiting carriage an hour later, when he personally ensured she arrived safely back at her shabby boarding house, when he placed a card with his solicitor's information in her hand and told her again to take whatever time she needed, she knew she was going to say yes. Because what other choice did she really have? Rosalind didn't sleep that night. She sat by the single candle in her rented room, turning Alexander's card over and over in her hands, while her father snored fitfully in the adjoining chamber. The thin walls did nothing to mask his labored breathing. The physician had been blunt. Her father's heart was failing. The stress of their financial ruin, combined with years of excessive living, had taken its toll. He had months, perhaps a year if he was fortunate and could afford proper care, which he couldn't. Rosalind pressed her fists against her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened constantly these days. She was so tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of pretending everything would work itself out. Tired of watching her father fade while she scrambled helplessly for solutions that didn't exist. And now this. A duke, not just any duke, but the wealthiest man in England, had offered her exactly what she needed. Money, security, social restoration, all in exchange for what? A marriage in name only. Separate lives under the same nominal roof. Freedom for both of them from society's demands. It sounded too good to be true. Which usually meant it was. Rosalind thought back to the ballroom, to the way Alexander had looked at her. Not with pity, she would have recognized that immediately. And not with desire, despite the romantic speculation that must be spreading through every drawing room in London by now. No. He'd looked at her with something far more dangerous. Understanding. He'd seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one had in months. Possibly years. Rosalind? Her father's voice, thin and querulous, drifted through the wall. Is that you, child? She rose quickly, smoothing her worn nightgown, and pushed through the door to his room. William Fairwater lay propped against pillows, his face gray in the dawn light seeping through the threadbare curtains. He'd aged a decade in 3 months, his once robust frame now skeletal, his hands trembling against the thin blanket. I'm here, Papa. She took his hand gently. How are you feeling? I had the strangest dream. His eyes, still sharp despite his illness, focused on her face. I dreamed you went to a ball, that you danced with a duke. Foolish, isn't it? Rosalind's throat tightened. Papa, I've ruined you. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. My beautiful girl, you should have married Lord Ashcroft when you had the chance. Before I lost everything. Before... Hush. She squeezed his hand. Lord Ashcroft was a pompous bore who only wanted my dowry. You did me a favor by losing it first. Her attempt at humor fell flat. They both knew the truth. Without money, without connections, Rosalind had no prospects. No future beyond drudgery or charity. And her father, consumed by guilt and shame, was dying from it, unless she accepted Alexander's offer. "Papa," she said slowly, "what if I told you there might be a way out of this? A way to settle the debts, get you proper medical care, restore our name?" Channer. His eyes widened with desperate hope that broke her heart. "How? Rosalind, you haven't done anything foolish, have you? Promised something you shouldn't?" "No, nothing like that." She took a deep breath. "But I have received a proposal. Of marriage." The silence stretched. Then her father began to laugh, a horrible, rattling sound that dissolved into coughing. When he could speak again, his voice was bitter. "A proposal? From whom? Some merchant hoping to buy his way into society? Some aging widower looking for a nursemaid? From the Duke of Winterbourne?" Her father stared at her. "That's not funny, Rosalind. I'm not joking." She met his gaze steadily. "He asked me last night, at the Bellingham ball. Which wasn't a dream, Papa. I really did go. And I really did dance with him. And he really did propose. But why? Why would the Duke of Winterbourne?" Understanding dawned in her father's eyes, followed by horror. "Oh God! What did you do? What did you promise him?" "Nothing." Rosalind stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "It's not like that. He wants a marriage of convenience. A business arrangement. He gets freedom from society's matchmaking. I get security and the ability to help you. We would live largely separate lives. It would be practical." "Practical." Her father's voice was hollow. "You would marry a stranger for money. I've brought you to this. Reduced my daughter to having options," Rosalind interrupted firmly. "For the first time in months, I have an actual option beyond watching you die while I scrub floors in someone else's house. So yes, Papa, I'm considering it. Because I love you, and because I'm not too proud to accept help when we desperately need it." Her father was silent for a long moment, studying her face with eyes that had once been sharp enough to spot a marked card across a gaming table. What they saw now made him sag back against his pillows. "You like him," he said quietly. "This Duke, you actually like him." Rosalind opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Did she like Alexander? She barely knew him. They'd spent perhaps an hour in each other's company, shared one dance, one moonlit conversation. That wasn't enough to base any real feeling on. But she remembered the way he'd looked at her. The understanding in his eyes, the gentleness of his touch, as he'd steadied her, the raw honesty, when he'd spoken about his own trapped existence. Yes, she realized with a shock. She did like him, which made this whole situation infinitely more complicated. "I barely know him," she said finally. "But what I do know suggests he's a good man in an impossible situation. Just like us. And if we can help each other." She trailed off, spreading her hands helplessly. Her father reached for her, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed. His hand, once so strong, felt fragile, as paper in hers. "I want you to be happy, my dear. Above all else. If this marriage would make you miserable—" "I'm already miserable, Papa. We both are." Rosalind blinked back tears. "At least this way, we'd be miserable with full stomachs and a roof over our heads. And who knows? Perhaps in time." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't dare voice the tiny, traitorous hope that had taken root in her chest. That perhaps a marriage begun in practicality might become something more. That perhaps Alexander's loneliness and her own might find comfort in each other. Foolish. Dangerous. The kind of hope that led to heartbreak. But hope nonetheless. By noon, Rosalind stood outside an elegant townhouse in one of London's most fashionable squares. Alexander's solicitor's card clutched in her hand like a talisman. She'd spent the morning writing and rewriting a note, trying to sound decisive rather than desperate, rational rather than romantic. In the end, she'd kept it simple. I accept your offer. When shall we discuss terms? The door opened before she could knock, revealing a severe-looking butler who somehow managed to convey both welcome and warning. Miss Fairwater, I presume? His Grace is expecting you. Please, follow me. Expecting her. Of course he was. Alexander had known she would come, had known she had no real choice, no matter how he'd framed it as one. The realization should have rankled, but somehow it didn't. There was a strange relief in being understood, in not having to pretend her decision was anything other than survival, dressed up in matrimonial trappings. The butler led her through rooms that spoke of wealth beyond her imagining. Not the showy, nouveau riche ostentation of those trying to prove their worth, but the quiet confidence of old money, old title, old power. Persian rugs that cost more than her father's entire gambling debts. Paintings by masters whose names she recognized from her better days. Furniture that had probably graced these rooms for generations. This would be her home. If she went through with this. These halls. These rooms. This life. The thought was terrifying. Alexander rose when she entered his study. And for a moment, they simply looked at each other. In daylight, without the ballroom's romantic lighting and desperate circumstances, he should have seemed different, more ordinary, less like something out of a fever dream. Instead, he looked solid, real. The slight shadows under his eyes suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. His cravat was tied with less precision than last night, and his hair looked as though he'd been running his hands through it. These small imperfections made him somehow more, not less, appealing. Dangerous territory, Rosalind reminded herself. This was business. Just business. You came, Alexander said, and there was relief in his voice. I wasn't certain you would. I said I would think about it. I did. And she held up the note, then set it on his desk. I accept. If the offer still stands. It stands. He moved around the desk but didn't approach her, maintaining a careful distance. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. The next hour was surreal. Alexander's solicitor, a precisely dressed man named Mr. Grimsby, who materialized with almost supernatural timing, walked them through a contract that was both more and less than Rosalind had expected. The financial terms were staggeringly generous. All her father's debts, paid immediately. A house in the countryside, where her father could recuperate with full medical care. A separate allowance for her personal use that exceeded what she'd once had as a wealthy gentleman's daughter. In exchange, she would bear the title of Duchess of Winterbourne. Attend social functions as required. Maintain separate quarters in his various estates. After 1 year, if both parties agreed the arrangement wasn't working, they could quietly dissolve the marriage with her financial security guaranteed. It was, in every practical sense, perfect. There's one more thing, Alexander said after the solicitor had left them to review the documents. He picked up a small velvet box from his desk. This is my mother's ring. It would be appropriate for you to wear it. Unless you'd prefer something else? Rosalind opened the box with trembling hands. The ring inside was exquisite, a deep sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in gold so old it had taken on a warm patina. Beautiful, but not ostentatious. Perfect for a woman who would be duchess, but not quite wife. It's lovely, she whispered. But, Alexander, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we sign these papers, once we announce an engagement, there's no going back. Your reputation will be tied to mine. The whispers, the scandal. Let them whisper. He took the ring from the box and held it up to the light. I've spent my entire life worrying about reputation, about duty, about meeting everyone's expectations. For once, just once, I want to make a decision. That's mine. Even if that decision is choosing a bride who society thinks is beneath me. I am beneath you. No. Alexander's voice was firm. You're not. You're someone who's been dealt an unfair hand and is trying to play it with dignity. There's nothing beneath about that. If anything, most of society is beneath you. The conviction in his words made Rosalind's eyes sting. How long had it been since anyone had spoken to her with such respect? Such genuine regard? When? She asked. Would you marry me? Alexander's mouth quirked. I suppose we should make it official first. Rosalind Fairwater, will you do me the honor of becoming my Duchess? Not for love, not for passion, but for mutual survival and perhaps, in time, genuine friendship. It was possibly the least romantic proposal in history. Rosalind found herself smiling despite everything. Yes, Alexander Hadley. I'll marry you. For all those entirely practical reasons. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. As if fate had always intended for the disgraced gentleman's daughter and the trapped duke to find each other in a ballroom and forge an alliance from desperation. Or perhaps that was just the dangerous hope talking again. Alexander raised her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, formal, proper, exactly what propriety demanded. But his eyes, when they met hers, held warmth that had nothing to do with duty. We'll marry by special license, he said. Within the week, before your creditors can act. The announcement will go out tomorrow. Society will be scandalized, but they'll accept it because they have no choice. He hesitated, then added, Lady Genevieve would like to meet you tonight, if you're willing. She's enthusiastic about the match. Does she know it's not a love match? Genevieve knows I would never marry for duty alone. Whatever our reasons, she'll support us. He paused. She'll like you. Everyone who truly knows. You will. The confidence in his voice was almost enough to make Rosalind believe it. Almost. The announcement of Alexander Hadley, Duke of Winterbourne's engagement to Miss Rosalind Fairwater, appeared in the society pages the following morning. By afternoon, London was in an uproar. Rosalind discovered this when she attempted to visit her father's physician to arrange his transfer to the countryside cottage Alexander had acquired. The doctor's waiting room, usually half empty, was packed with well-dressed women who had suddenly developed urgent medical needs that required immediate consultation. What they actually wanted was gossip. Miss Fairwater, forgive me, future Duchess, such a whirlwind romance. Lady Ashcroft's smile was sharp as knives. We had no idea His Grace was even courting anyone. He wasn't, Rosalind replied evenly, settling into a chair with more confidence than she felt. We met at the Bellingham ball. Sometimes, these things simply happen. How fortuitous that you happened to be there, given your family's recent troubles. Another woman. Gladstone leaned forward with predatory interest. One might almost think it was planned. The implication was clear. Rosalind had entrapped Alexander through some combination of seduction and manipulation. Never mind that he'd been the one to propose. Never mind that their arrangement was his idea entirely. Society saw what it wanted to see, a fortune hunter who'd caught the most eligible bachelor in England. Before Rosalind could formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse, a familiar voice cut through the tension like a blade. One might also think, Lady Genevieve Hadley said from the doorway, that my brother is perfectly capable of making his own decisions. Unless you're suggesting the Duke of Winterbourne is somehow weak-minded enough to be manipulated? The room went silent. Lady Genevieve was tall, handsome, and radiated the kind of confidence that came from being born to one of England's oldest families. She swept into the waiting room like a ship in full sail. her gaze dismissing the assembled gossips with aristocratic disdain. "Miss Fairwater." Genevieve's smile was genuine. "How delightful to find you here. I was hoping we might take tea this afternoon. Alexander mentioned you share my interest in horticulture." It was a lifeline, and Rosalind grasped it gratefully. "I would be honored, Lady Genevieve." "Wonderful. My carriage is outside." Genevieve offered her arm, then glanced back at the stunned gathering. "Ladies, I'm sure your urgent medical needs will keep you occupied. Good day." They escaped into the afternoon sunshine, Genevieve's coachman already holding the carriage door. Once inside, Genevieve collapsed against the squabs and began to laugh. "Your faces. All of you looked like fish, gasping for air." She wiped tears from her eyes. "Oh, this is going to be fun. I haven't scandalized society properly in years." Rosalind couldn't help but smile. "Thank you for the rescue. Though I suppose I should get used to that sort of reaction." "Probably." Genevieve's humor faded into something more serious. "Alexander told me everything. About your arrangement. I want you to know. I think it's brilliant." "You do?" "Absolutely. My brother has been miserable for years, trapped by duty and expectation. Every social event is a battlefield of ambitious mamas throwing their daughters at him like sacrificial offerings. He needs someone who understands that he's a person, not just a title." Genevieve studied Rosalind thoughtfully. "And you need security and a chance to rebuild your life without being constantly punished for your father's mistakes. Almost refreshingly honest in a world built on pretense. Your brother said you've been trying to matchmake him." "I have. Unsuccessfully." Genevieve grinned. "But this is better than anything I could have arranged. A marriage based on mutual understanding rather than romantic delusion? Much more likely to succeed, in my opinion. Romance fades. Respect endures." The carriage rolled through London streets, and Rosalind found herself relaxing slightly. Genevieve's forthright manner was oddly comforting. No games, no hidden meanings, just straightforward conversation. "What was he like?" Rosalind asked. "Before he became Duke." "Alexander. I mean," Genevieve's expression softened. "Lighter. He loved to read philosophy, mostly, and poetry. He played piano beautifully, though he never performed in public. He was kind to servants, patient with children, hopeless with horses." She smiled at the memories. "Then our uncle died, and Alexander inherited everything. At 22, far too young, really. The responsibilities crushed him. He changed. Became what he thought a duke should be: remote, proper, untouchable. I've missed my brother these past 7 years. Maybe this arrangement will give him some of that freedom back," Rosalind said quietly. "Maybe," Genevieve's sharp gaze fixed on her. "Or maybe it will give him something better. Tell me, Rosalind, do you like my brother?" "I barely know him." That wasn't the question. Rosalind looked out the window at the passing streets, considering. "Yes," she admitted finally. "What little I know, I like very much. But that doesn't change what this is. A practical arrangement. Nothing more." Genevieve's tone suggested profound skepticism. "We'll see about that." The tea at Genevieve's townhouse was surprisingly pleasant. They discussed books, gardens, the ridiculous fashions currently dominating society. Genevieve shared scandalous stories about various aristocrats that made Rosalind laugh until her sides ached. For a few hours, Rosalind almost forgot about the strangeness of her situation, until Genevieve said, casually, over her third cup of tea, "Alexander hasn't brought a woman home to meet the family in 7 years. Not once. Even I, his beloved sister, haven't been permitted to meet any of his supposed romantic interests. Yet here you are, drinking tea in my parlor 2 days after meeting him." She set down her cup with a delicate clink. Whatever you two think this arrangement is, I suspect it's already more than either of you realizes. Rosalind's breath caught. He was being kind, helping me escape awkward speculation. Alexander is many things, but he's never kind without purpose. Genevieve leaned forward, her eyes intense. He sees something in you, Rosalind. Something he needs. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you see something in him too. The question is whether you'll both be too stubborn to admit it. Before Rosalind could respond, a commotion in the foyer interrupted them. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably Alexander's, sharp, with anger. Both women rose and hurried to the hall. Alexander stood just inside the entrance, his expression thunderous, facing a man Rosalind had never seen before. Tall, dark-haired, with handsome features twisted into a sneer. Ridiculous, the stranger was saying. You expect me to believe you're marrying some disgraced nobody out of love? This is a ploy. Alexander. Some scheme you've cooked up to. Too. Careful, Reginald. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. You're speaking about my fiancée. The man Reginald laughed harshly. Your fiancée? How convenient that you suddenly discovered her right when the family was pressuring you about marriage. How incredibly convenient that she happens to need your money desperately enough to agree to whatever arrangement you've... He didn't finish. Alexander's fist connected with his jaw with a crack that echoed through the foyer. Reginald stumbled backward, hand flying to his bleeding mouth. You hit me. You actually... And I'll do it again if you insult Rosalind. Alexander's hands were still clenched, his entire body vibrating with barely controlled rage. Get out. Now. Clenched. This isn't over. Reginald spat blood onto the pristine marble floor. You think marrying her will solve everything? Will make the family accept this farce? They'll eat her alive, Alexander. They'll make her regret ever accepting your name. Then they'll answer to me. Alexander took a step forward, closing, and something in his expression made Reginald retreat toward the door. Every insult to my wife is an insult to me. Every slight against her is war against my house. Make sure the family understands that. Reginald's laugh was bitter. Your wife? She's not your wife yet. There's still time for her to realize what a mistake she's making, to understand that being Duchess to a man who can't actually... Out! Alexander's roar shook the windows. Reginald fled, the door slamming behind him. Silence descended, broken only by Alexander's harsh breathing. He stood with his back to them, shoulders rigid, fists still clenched. Genevieve moved first, touching her brother's arm gently. Are you all right? Fine. The word was clipped. I'm sorry you both had to witness that. Who was he? Rosalind asked quietly. My cousin. Second in line for the title after me. Alexander finally turned, and Rosalind could see the effort it took him to smooth his expression back to neutrality. He's been waiting for me to die without heirs so he can inherit. Our engagement threatens that hope. 1. What did he mean? Rosalind said slowly. About you not being able to? She trailed off, not quite sure how to phrase the question. Alexander's jaw clenched. Genevieve shot him a look that was pure sisterly concern mixed with exasperation. He's referring to an old rumor, Genevieve said when Alexander remained silent. After our uncle died, Alexander had a relationship that ended badly. The woman in question spread gossip that he was incapable of fulfilling marital duties. It was pure spite. She'd wanted to be Duchess, and he'd refused. But the rumors persisted. They're not true, Alexander said flatly, looking directly at Rosalind. In case you were wondering, Reginald was simply trying to cause doubt, to make you question whether this arrangement is viable. I wasn't wondering. Rosalind met his gaze steadily. Your personal capabilities are none of my business anyway. Our arrangement doesn't require, she gestured vaguely, heat flooding her cheeks. No, Alexander agreed quietly. It doesn't. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed willing to name. Genevieve cleared her throat pointedly. Well, now that Reginald has shown his hand, we know what to expect. The family will resist this marriage. They'll try to find ways to undermine it, to prove it's a sham. She looked between them. Which means you'll need to present a united front. Appear devoted. At least in public. We can manage that, Rosalind said, though her heart raced at the thought. Appearing devoted to Alexander wouldn't require much acting, which was exactly the problem. Good, Genevieve smiled, though worry lingered in her eyes. Because the wedding is in 4 days, and I guarantee every enemy you both have known and unknown will be watching for cracks to exploit. The carriage ride back to Rosalind's boarding house was quiet. Alexander had insisted on accompanying her despite her protests, and now they sat across from each other in the dim interior. The only sound the clatter of wheels on cobblestone. I'm sorry, Alexander said finally. About Reginald. About what he said. I should have warned you that my family wouldn't accept this easily. One. You did warn me. You said society would speculate. Rosalind managed to smile. You just didn't mention your cousin was prone to violence. I hit him, not the other way around. Only after he insulted me. Which was. She paused, choosing words carefully. Unexpected. And unnecessary. Though I appreciate the sentiment. It was entirely necessary. Alexander's voice was fierce. You're to be my Duchess. No one gets to speak about you that way. Not my cousin, not society, not anyone. The protectiveness in his tone made Rosalind's chest tighten. This was supposed to be business. Practical. A transaction between two people who needed each other. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, like something real taking root in the space between them. Alexander, she said quietly. What Reginald said about rumors, about past relationships. I want you to know that I don't need to know about any of that. Your past is your own, but you deserve honesty. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, close enough that she could see the strain around his eyes. The woman Genevieve mentioned her name was Victoria. We courted for 6 months. I thought perhaps I could care for her, make it work. But she wanted power, title, wealth, not me. When I realized that, I ended it. And she lashed out. Spectacularly. The rumor she spread was designed to make me unmarriageable. If a duke can't produce heirs, what good is he? His smile was bitter. It nearly worked. For 2 years, I couldn't attend a social function without whispers following me. Eventually, I stopped trying to refute it. Focused on estate management, instead. Became the hermit duke everyone expected. Until a desperate woman crashed into you at a ball. Until a brave woman gave me an excuse to stop hiding. Alexander reached across the space between them and took her hand. This arrangement we've made, I know it's not conventional. I know it's not what you probably dreamed of when you imagined your wedding day. But I need you to know that I will honor every promise I've made. I will protect you, provide for you, stand beside you, against whatever comes. That much is real, regardless of what else is or isn't between us. Rosalind looked down at their joined hands, her calloused fingers from months of work, his smooth and steady. A duke and a ruined lady. An arrangement born of desperation. Two people trying to survive circumstances neither had chosen. But also, two people who understood each other, who saw past titles and scandal to the human underneath, who offered each other kindness in a world that had shown them precious little. "In 4 days," she said, "I'll walk down the aisle and promise to be your wife, to stand beside you, support you, represent your house with dignity. And I'll mean it, Alexander. Every word. Because whatever else this is, you've given me hope when I had none. You've treated me with more respect in 3 days than society has shown me in 3 months. That means something. Maybe more than love would." Alexander's hand tightened on hers. "4 days. And then we face them all together, my cousin, your family, every gossip and social climber in London. Together." "Together," Rosalind agreed. The carriage slowed, stopping outside the boarding house. Through the window, Rosalind could see curtains twitching as neighbors tried to catch a glimpse of why a ducal carriage had stopped at such an address. By tomorrow, the whole street would be buzzing with speculation. Let them, she thought. For once, let them wonder about something positive, instead of tearing her down. Alexander helped her down, his hand lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. In the fading light, his eyes were soft, searching her face as if memorizing it. 4 days, he said again, quietly. Are you certain, Rosalind? Truly certain. She thought about her father, slowly dying in that cramped room, about the creditors circling like vultures, about the future that awaited her without intervention. Poverty, obscurity, slow erasure from the world that had once embraced her. And she thought about Alexander, about the loneliness she recognized in him, the yearning for authenticity beneath the ducal mask, the gentle way he'd caught her in the ballroom, as if she were something precious rather than broken. I'm certain, she said. And meant it. 4 days later, Rosalind Fairwater walked down the aisle of an ancient church, her hand on her father's trembling arm, toward a man she'd known less than a week. The church was packed half with Alexander's family and friends, looking on with various degrees of skepticism and acceptance, half with society gossips hoping to witness either a fairy tale or a spectacular disaster. Rosalind barely saw them. Her eyes were on Alexander, standing at the altar in formal dress, looking simultaneously nervous and determined. When their gazes met, he smiled small, private, real. A smile meant only for her. And when the vicar asked if she took this man to be her husband, Rosalind Fairwater spoke the words that would change everything. I do. Alexander's answering I do was steady and sure. He slipped a band beside his mother's ring. Not just any band, but one that matched it perfectly, as if they'd always been meant to sit together, as if this moment had been inevitable since the instant she'd crashed into him in that ballroom. You may kiss the bride. Alexander cupped her face gently, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Rosalind leaned into him, and when their lips met, it was soft and sweet, and utterly unlike the practical arrangement they'd both insisted this was. It was a promise, a beginning, and possibly, just possibly, the start of something neither had dared hope for. As they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Duke and Duchess Rosalind caught sight of Henrietta in the crowd, her face twisted with envy. Reginald stood near the back, his expression dark with barely suppressed rage. Lady Ashcroft looked scandalized. Others whispered behind gloved hands. Let them whisper, Rosalind thought, squeezing Alexander's arm. Let them doubt and scheme and gossip. Because for the first time in months, she wasn't facing the world alone. She had an ally, a partner. Someone who'd looked at her when she was nothing and seen someone worth saving. And if her heart insisted on hoping for more than partnership, if the warmth spreading through her chest suggested feelings that transcended practical arrangements well, they had time to figure that out. A lifetime, in fact. Together. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as beautiful and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. See you on the next one.